Okay.
All right, today we are going to be talking about grief from a biblical perspective. Um, I will not lie to you. I started working on this last night, like 7 p.m. So we're going to see what we find. Um, so grief, simply put, is the emotional and behavioral response to loss or death, and it may relate to mental, relational, and somatic symptoms, physical symptoms. Common emotions related to grief are denial, shame, sadness, and loneliness. Um, so there are a lot of risk factors for people grieving um, in less healthy ways. Um, these can also lead to complicated grief, which is more chronic grief, more difficult to treat. Um, so more traumatizing deaths, or having a very close relationship with the person can be contributing factors to um, complicated grief. Let me see here. So this is a personal note from me. Kubler-Ross, the most standard, recognizable stages of grief form we have. Um, I'll be honest, I don't love it. It's not normative. It's not linear. So I always go for the shock, disorganized, and reorganized phases. So shock is what we would call denial. It's just that initial time of I need to accept this grief is actually real. This loss is actually happened. Disorganized would include all the emotional responses to the grief, and then reorganization is when we find meaning in the loss. We reincorporate that meaning into our lives in a functional way. It's close to acceptance. Um, so the practical benefits of grief, there are actually many benefits to grief. I don't think many people look at the benefits of grief, so I wanted to point this out. It gives us gratitude for life and the blessings that God has given us. It improves our awareness of sin and its ramifications on our world. Death is a consequence of sin. It provides wisdom. This is what this over here is talking about. Ecclesiastes has a lot to say about grieving and loss. Um, so if you want further reading, Ecclesiastes. Um, and it builds relationships and opportunities for ministry and witnessing. And also, one of the biggest benefits of grief, I think, is that God does draw close to the brokenhearted, and He saves those who are crushed in spirit. Um, so a lot of Christians actually we look at grief, we're like, okay, I know they're lost. I know they're dead. I know that that loss has occurred. Um, but I found that we often deny ourselves the right to properly grieve. And later I'm going to get into when we're grieving someone who's saved, that's natural, that's healthy. But also for everyone, there is a season for grief. I don't know if you guys can, I certainly can't. Um, but there's a time to mourn and a time to dance, um, and a time to weep, and a time to laugh. Strike that, reverse it, but it's applicable. Um, and God does care about our grief. So when people come to you and they say, "Hey, I've felt this loss. I've just never known how to grieve. Um, I don't know how to process through it, or I don't feel the right because I know they're in heaven." Um, we know that God has compassion on us. I'm going to go to a verse in just a second, um, that more fully illustrates that. I love this one. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But Jesus, it's speaking about. This is from Isaiah. He was rejected of men. He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. So some quick tips that I've found useful in working with those who are going through grief is psychoeducation, helping them understand the phases of grief and how grieving looks differently for everyone. It's important to take a more holistic view of the grief. How did it happen? Like, examine the facts, help them process through it, accept that it actually did happen. And then, so when we're in times of emotional turmoil, it can be challenging to challenge and be willing to have any kind of input, if I'm honest. Or that's been my experience. So I've learned that it's necessary to challenge, because there is some unrealistic thinking when it comes to loss, and help them to reframe it in a healthier way. And I have also found that it's helpful for when minors at least are in grief, to bring someone else in. I'd say this is probably universally true. They'll have someone, hopefully, who's also experienced that loss or has seen the impact of the loss on their life, to lend validity to their pain, and help them to not feel so alone. And it's, as always, important to promote the resiliency and the unity of their support system. So this is a complicated topic that I don't know was necessarily wise for me to put in this slideshow, but I did. So as I said earlier, I think it's Paul. Yeah, it's Paul. It's the Thessalonians. Said, but I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, speaking about those who are saved and have passed, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. I do find it challenging to walk through grief with those who have lost a loved one and they seriously doubt their salvation, the salvation of the lost. So what I usually go to is two things. That pain is temporary for you. God will wipe away your tears. It will be okay in the end for you. And it also leaves us with more of an urgency in our hearts to go and witness of Jesus and his sacrifice and how faith in him can bring eternal life. I love this thing from Charles Spurgeon. If sinners be damned, at least let them leap to hell over our dead bodies. And if they perish, let them perish with our arms wrapped about their knees, imploring them to stay. If hell must be filled, let it be filled in the teeth of our exhortations, and let no one go unwarned and unprayed for. So that's this part of this. That is the conclusion of the slideshow, but I'd love to open this up to discussion. Does anyone have any thoughts, questions on their mind?
Yeah, that was very good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Especially the part where, I mean, I kind of want to open up a part where you have somebody who's coming into counseling and they come with a family member that they feel may not have received salvation. So yeah, let's discuss that a little bit of how you deal with that in the session room.
That's a tough one.
It's very tough. What do you think, Casey?
I might be oversimplifying it. But I usually use one of those two routes. You will be okay. You are saved. There will be peace that surpasses understanding. And right now you are feeling natural fear. And it's well-founded fear. But for them, if they are saved, it's going to be okay. It doesn't. Here's the thing: nothing will make what's happening to the other person okay. But they had choice. They have the same just God that the living does. They had a choice, and they rejected salvation. They rejected the free gift that Jesus gave. It's fair. It's sad that they chose the way they did, but it's their choice to make. They have free will. I'm curious what other people think, though.
Well, and something that I think that no one will ever know is that if they receive Christ with their dying breath,
Mm-hmm.
then they've received Christ. So you can't just assume that just because they weren't saved yesterday, they weren't saved before they died. Because if you planted those seeds,
Yeah,
they may take that leap.
that's
So
such a great point.
yeah.
The other part is showing the importance of our testimony in life, having a good testimony, and being somebody who talks to others about salvation, the importance of it. God says, go out and teach all nations, baptizing them, right? So the importance of, yes, we're to talk about Christ all the time. And it's not just in words, it's in our actions. So the importance of having our actions speak for us too in front of others. We don't know who we're influencing. And here's the thing, as Christians too, it's like you don't know who you're influencing at any time. People are, got their eyes on you, especially if they know that you're a church member. They've got your eyes on you. See, told you they're a hypocrite, all that stuff. Well, we're sinners. We're all sinners. We're not going to be at our best. So who else?
Yeah, I mean, I also find it helpful to focus on like how loving and gracious and just Jesus is, rather than the individual, because individuals, like Jana was saying, I mean, who knows what's going on in their mind, what they actually did, what their capacity was. And that's why the Bible says, judge no one. I mean, we really are not in a position to judge if we don't have, that's not our job, and we don't have the capacity. But we do know Christ and how loving and amazing he is. And so I would rather, submit them into the hands of Jesus and let him do what he does, and whatever he does will be the best thing.
Who else? Yeah, this is such a tough topic. And if you look at Grief Share, we have Grief Share at our church, and it's just such a tough topic. I did it probably 10, 15 times, taught it, whatever, facilitated it. And it was different every time. And I'm telling you, the thing is when people are going through grief, I just tell them, and you got to get in some form of support. You can't do this alone. Just like, just like addictions and stuff like that. God didn't create us to be alone. He created us to be in community with others and to support each other. Because when, I may be going through something, and if I can get support from somebody, that's great, because then I'm going to be able to give support later as well. Who else? Who else has thoughts on grief? What have you done in your counseling room or in your sessions to help people through grief? And it doesn't have to be grief and dying. We grieve all kinds of things. We grieve kids growing up and leaving the nest, empty nesters, so how do you deal with people who are grieving, through other life situations? I'm going to open that up to y'all.
Well, I've got a client now who they moved from Iowa and live out in the country, so she's a little bit isolated, but all of her family is back in Iowa, and she can't let go of, even though she recognizes she sees her family more now because she's more intentional about seeing them when she lived there. She can't relax where she is. So I'm trying to get her to look at, what does God have for you here? Because he didn't move you here. This move didn't happen just to make you miserable. So there's something here that he wants you to accomplish. So you've got to figure that out.
Yeah, that's good. And it may be partly, what's your identity outside of this person? Who am I? I know, when I have family members, and when one person passes, just think of a husband and wife that have been together for 50 years plus, and somebody passes, and a couple things, that person was my identity or whatever. But what if you were taking care of them through this whole process? So I was a caretaker and a caregiver, and now I'm not. Now who am I? So what's my new identity?
Well, and it's kind of a double whammy in that situation, because not only have you lost the person, you've lost your identity as their caregiver. And so that makes it exceptionally hard.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's who am I now?
Yeah.
Yeah. My mother went through, my grandmother lived with her until she passed. And then just shortly after that, my dad got sick, and then he passed. And then it's like, she spent a lot of time after that going, who am I now? I was this for so many years, and now I don't have that. So I'm out of my routine. I'm out of all kinds of things. So I think as counselors, we have to help them process through the grief, whatever that grief is, establish a routine, and then help them with identity, maybe even talk to them about goals, values, things like that. With that new routine and new rhythm, because I just think, look at your heartbeat. It's always in rhythm until you do other things that make it, come out of that one rhythm, whether it's exercising or whatever it is. But it stays in some form of rhythm. And if it's out of rhythm, that means there's something wrong. So we want to establish some form of rhythm and help them through that too.
And I think we need to be cognizant of those clients who box away their grief and choose not to deal with it. They just get so busy with life and distract themselves so that they don't have to feel that pain. And I think a lot of times that's where some of those somatic symptoms arise, because it's going to come out somewhere.
That's such a great, helping them just sit in that moment. So that's what good, for therapy sessions, it's so awesome to be able to sit there with them in that pain, in a safe place, safe environment that allows them to do that. That's good.
Mhm.
What are some of you, so if you guys have been through some situations like that, what are some things that you've done to help people through grieving something? It doesn't have to be death, it could be just grieving something. Loss of a job, loss of a marriage, loss of a family member moving away. What? Loss. Let's just talk about loss.
I always remind them that grief is a need. It's not something that we choose. It is a conscious choice, and that we need to grieve in a healthy way. But like Jenna was saying, it's going to show up somehow. Processing through it in a healthy way gets it out in a
Mhm.
much less painful manner.
Mhm. And also, I find that, I mean, our own capacity to sit in discomfort is, as a measure of how much we would be able to actually allow them to sit in their discomfort rather than trying to rush through it and saying, oh, yeah, just give the simplistic answers that, oh, it's all going to be okay. Or, there's some purpose in this, which, yeah, true, there is a purpose in this, but right now it is a time to just sit in that pain. And it's hard to do that with somebody else if we can't do it for ourselves.
That is so good. Yeah, absolutely. So the scripture about there is a time
Mhm.
for all of these things, a season, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, we don't have to figure out the reason for anything. Sometimes we just have to sit in that pain or that sorrow or whatever and just feel it. To me, as I talk through people in supervision, it's like, come on, just feel that stuff with them, or feel your own thing that you're going through, because there's going to come a time when somebody else needs that empathy that only you can give. God's going to place them in your life for a reason, because you've experienced something. I see it all the time where people are matched up with counselors. God does this, right? Matches them up with counselors who have been through a certain experience. It's happened to me. It's like, oh, I've got this. I understand this, right?
Mhm.
I can help them understand because I totally get the pain that they're feeling.
Mhm.
So it's funny because people will go, I thank God for going through some things that are painful, because then I go, I can use that for other people, right?
Mhm.
And so I thank God for that. It's like, oh, you're weird. No, it's it's like, no, it's not that at all. It's like, now I can use this pain to understand others and help
Mhm.
them through the situation, at least help them feel, somebody's with them, normalize it, if you will.
Mhm.
Well, it
Who
gives
else?
you a new level of empathy
Mhm.
because you've been there, you've walked that journey. So that's totally different than just reading about it in a book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Oh, you're so right, Jana. It's like the difference between reading it in a book and experiencing it yourself and talking through it. That's what and a lot of times I want people to talk through things, because once it comes out of their mouth, it becomes more real.
Mhm.
When they hear the words come out of their mouth and well, that wasn't so bad. I was able to talk through it.
Mhm.
Well, and it helps them process it too. As they're talking about it, then they're gaining more understanding. Because like you said, it does become more real.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I find that we almost need to give some patients permission to grieve and encourage them to explore the more negative aspects of it, regrets and doubts and questions that they have that they aren't willing to face on their own. because not just because that's necessary in processing, but because that usually brings more honest and authentic meaning when it is time for reintegration, because they've looked at it holistically, which is something I had to learn kind of the hard way. Early in my training, before I came to Abundant Life, I kind of did look at it in that trite way of like, oh, well, they're in heaven now, it's good. But, and I'm kind of ashamed of that, to be honest with you, but now it's so beneficial to sit in that discomfort and almost not pride, not manipulate, but to help them walk in that themselves. It feels good. That sounds bad. It feels necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, and I think if they have a faith, we also have to address their anger towards God,
Mhm.
because a lot of times they'll feel like they've been cheated or something. And I've had several people who said, yeah, they were angry at God. So I asked them, do you think God can handle that?
Mhm.
And let him have it, because he can handle it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. He's and that's what I think. He's our father. Of course, he's going to understand when we're in. But here's the other part. We don't know the whole situation of everything. You know, people have died, and then good things have come out of when people have died. You know,
Mhm.
we don't know everything that's going to go on. Here's the other part is, as counselors, we don't know the seeds that we're planting with our clients, you know, and how they go out and their life changes. There's oftentimes, you know, you'll be sitting with somebody for a period of time, they terminate, and then all of it doesn't come together for a little bit, and you never see the result of what you did in their life. But just know that that you are doing good in their life.
Mhm.
If they don't act on it, you're still giving them the tool and everything.
Mhm. And also, if you look at the Psalms, you know, I mean, there is such a place to vent. I mean, you know, David vented, and you know, I mean, even Jesus himself, Psalm 22, I mean, he says, you know, my God, why have you forsaken me? And there's no resolution there in that. But it's almost like God is giving us permission to vent to him.
Oh, absolutely. You know, that's a good, I love that you brought it up. It is another thing. And I have this sheet. I'll see if I can't find it, but it's like what emotions, and then scripture behind all the emotions that Jesus, so he's experienced all the emotions that we have. So that's where
Mhm.
his understanding was with everything,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
even on the cross, it's like, he's like going, why have you forsaken me, or whatever, or not one on the cross, but you know what I'm saying. So
Mhm.
all of those things, it's like feeling alone in things,
Mhm.
but we're not alone.
Mhm.
So how do you guys handle that with people when they are feeling alone in situations?
Well, it depends on if they're feeling, you know, the extent of their feeling alone. So if they're at home and they have other loved ones there and they're still feeling alone, then I think that's where it's important to encourage community and sharing, having them share, because they're all going through some sort of grief.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
work through it together, and then remember that that God is always with them.
Yes.
And I think, you know, something that years ago I lost a brother, and my dad's second wife began to tear him down verbally. So I think we need to be aware that there are other factors that may play into the grief. Because not only are they grieving the loss, but then they're grieving this relationship that may be bringing them strife or, you know, that type of thing as well. So
Hmm.
I think just allowing them and encouraging them to talk and get everything out is the best thing, that probably the most therapeutic thing we can do.
Mhm. And yeah, I think that's great. And I'm wondering, as counselors, to, I mean, there's always a healthy and unhealthy way of being when you're in grief, and you know, you can always resort to things that are going to be destructive. And I mean, I'm curious, as more experienced counselors, if you all, you know, how do you handle that? How do you kind of redirect people to kind of, you know, or, you know, maybe caution them about, you know, the unhealthy grieving dynamics, mechanisms?
For me, what I typically do is very brief psychoeducation about it.
Mhm.
And that usually suffices. Or if it comes out in some kind of cognitive processing,
Mhm.
I do just challenge it or help them reframe it in a kind way that's meeting them emotionally where they're at.
Mhm. Mhm.
Who else?